And I think that's the end of what I have. So just a reminder that mostly in this module, you're going to be doing assignments. We are going to be looking at one reading, but other than that, it's mostly assignments. And we have almost 3 weeks to get 3 assignments, or more than that, actually, almost 2 weeks for each assignment, about 10 days. So, so we have another almost a month in the course for you to work on these assignments without having any other distractions. And of course, lots of time then as you're working on them, if you have questions, to get in touch with me and we can work them through. And again, I would suggest, if you feel comfortable doing so, that you put your questions on announcements, so that as I'm answering those questions, probably somebody else is having the same question too, or will, and so they'll be able to refer to that. Okay, so the first assignment is going to be, of this particular module, is going to be the second set of readings. So this is going to be 8 readings of the total of 15 that you've done for this assignment. This is a large assignment, worth a significant amount of the marks that you're going to be getting in this course. It's due March the 22nd. And you will critique 3 of those 8 articles, and then you will synthesize all 8. So I've actually on the module 6, I've put in a little video that talks about synthesizing. It may or may not be helpful, but when I looked at it, I thought that there were some interesting ideas there that might be useful to you if this is the kind of writing that you're not used to doing. And of course, as I said, I'll be glad to answer your questions. The research method choice that you've hopefully made, and if you haven't, certainly do make it very, very quickly. On eClass, there's you're able to choose one of several chapters. Some are actually full already, so make sure that you get your choice in. And you will be then able to, based on reading that chapter, you'll develop a concept map, and there are some suggestions in the, and I put all of the information for each of the assignments on the module, on the class page, right on the page, so that you don't have to go scrambling around looking everywhere for the different descriptions. And I hope that will be helpful. I know it makes the page look a bit messy, but nevertheless, everything is there for you, and hopefully that will be helpful. So you'll do your concept map. There are some suggestions there about ideas that you can go to for developing concept maps. You don't have to use any of them. If you're used to developing concept maps, then, you know, please feel free to go ahead and use the method that works best for you. Once you've developed that concept map based on your reading of the chapter, and there are various ways in which you could think about developing that, then you'll just do a 300-word reflection on that particular method. Although you've chosen it, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to have to use it when you do your own research. It would be helpful for you to think about it ahead of time like this, but it isn't necessary, and you may change your mind anyway. So, so don't get too hung up on that. But you'll do a 300-word reflection on that method, and then you will do a small presentation, no longer than 10 minutes, using various methods that I've mentioned. You can use Screencast-O-Matic like I'm doing right now, which is a very easy and free program that you can download and use quite easily. If you want to get fancy, you pay an annual fee. If this is something you think you might use for your classes, for example, might be worth it, but you can certainly get lots of the services free. So that's one way to do it. You could do PowerPoint with VoiceOver, and you know, and that's a pretty easy way to do it as well. Or if you're really into computers and technology and you know how to use iMovie or various other platforms, then, you know, please feel free to use those. So what you'll do then is just bring together all of what you've done in your concept map and your 300-word reflection, and provide enough information for your colleagues to know something about that particular method. And then you'll post it on the forum that is provided. And just make sure that your name is whichever methodology method that you use for producing this little presentation. Put your name on it, and the name of the method that you're exploring, so that it's easy for us to identify. Okay, so there's that, and then your last assignment due on April the 12th, which is really the end of the course, is your comparative paper. And here what you have is two sets of papers, and I think it's 1.1 and 1.2, 2.1 and 2.2. So the ones fit together, the twos fit together, and you can have a quick look at them and decide which one you'd like to explore, and then just talk about what makes an academic paper an academic paper. By comparing these two, you'll be able to see what it is that is expected if you were to, for example, write up your research for an academic journal. And so looking at the two ways of communicating, disseminating knowledge is an important part of a researcher's task. And so this assignment will allow you to do that. Okay. And of course, again, any questions, please feel free to ask them. So we're going to be looking at a paper quickly today called Research Dilemmas, Paradigms, Methods, and Methodology. It was written in, it was published in 2006, so probably written in 2005 or whatever. And it's published in Issues in Educational Research, and it's written by two professors who were at Charles Sturt University in Australia. Now actually Sally Knipe is at La Trobe University in Melbourne. But I'm sure they continue to work together and meet at conferences and all that kind of stuff. So these are colleagues who were at the same university, perhaps doing a research course together, I don't know, but part of the frustration often in teaching a research course is that there are so many different ideas and arguments and discussions and so on about what is it that we mean by various terminology and so on. And of course, the whole huge discussion around quantitative versus qualitative rather than quantitative and qualitative, which is what they explore in this paper. Both of them are researchers and scholars in the study of teacher education. Noella tends to work in the area of elementary education, Sally more in secondary. Noella's work is around literacy and so on. And they both have very interesting research agendas, so you can have a look at their work if you want to ever look them up. But that shows you a little bit of what they look like. I apologize for the picture of Noella. It had to be magnified several times, so it's a little bit fuzzy, but it gives you an idea if you were running to her conference, what she'd look like. Okay, so they look at the whole issue of qualitative versus quantitative, and they argue instead for qualitative and or quantitative. I've come up with this title myself, but from my perspective, this is essentially what they're looking at. And of course, we know from what we've talked about in the course that quantitative has been the dominant methodology for a very long time. It was preferred because of its roots in scientific methods. However, with the ascendance of the social sciences, then we saw the beginnings of attention to qualitative research. And qualitative research became very, very important and continues to be extremely important, particularly in areas like education, nursing, some areas of health, and so on, where we're looking at human interaction, which cannot to the same degree be quantified as can the natural sciences. However, for a long time in education and in other branches of social science, quantitative was the method that was understood and known, and then questions began to be raised, and we talked about that in the Guba and Lincoln article, so I won't go into that now. However, they raised that as one of the controversies and discussions in educational research, and they suggest that for a long time people suggested that it was either quantitative or qualitative, but you couldn't combine them. But we know now, based on other readings, including Creswell and so on, that in fact we can bring them together in legitimate ways, and so they talk about that in their discussion in this paper. So how is it, and then they talk about how is it that we could understand paradigms. The whole notion of paradigms they suggest, and certainly is their experience in mind, that it is one of those, the word paradigm has been taken up in common lingo, so to speak. And so its usefulness has been to some degree denigrated because of this kind of popularization of the term. But what is it that we mean by paradigms when we're talking about research, which is of course where the word first arose. And so what they argue is that, and of course, as with anything else, there are those who would argue to some degree somewhat differently, but I think that they make a case for the notion that when we're talking about a theoretical framework, we're really talking about a paradigm. We're talking about the overarching philosophical home for the thinking that we bring to the research question that we're looking at. So they, in looking at various authors, suggest that a paradigm sets down the intent, motivation, and expectations for the research. It's a belief about the nature of knowledge. I would argue that it's not but it leads to a methodology and criteria for validity. And so certain homes lead to certain paths or have certain rooms in them that fit, and others may not fit as comfortably. Although we see lots of movement, sort of sliding doors, if you will, between various areas of research. And so there's a lot more permeability between the walls of various paradigmatic homes. Nevertheless, there is a kind of expectation, a belief system around the nature of knowledge that is different when you're talking about, for example, transformative research as compared to positivist research. And because of that, the ways in which we approach the research, the criteria we use for validity and so on is different. And we had a chance to talk about that in the last module. So some of the common paradigms they suggest, and there are others, but these are the predominant ones, particularly in education and other social sciences. There's positivism, which was followed by post-positivism, which is probably the more common of the two now in social science research. There's interpretivism, or what Lincoln and Guba, talk about constructivism. And that's also a way of talking about how we come to understand through interactions between social actors. And then we have the transformative paradigm, which is about looking at systems and the ways in which systems impose particular kinds of order, and how it is that we can then shift those systems. And we see, it's interesting because we hear a lot in the news these days, particularly in the US, about transforming systems that hold certain kinds of social values in place. And in a sense, that's what well, not in a sense, that is what transformative research does. It is thinking about how we can rethink the ways in which systems hold particular kinds of values and social norms in place, to the detriment of some and to the benefit of others, and how we can shift that organization. And then the pragmatic approach is, Creswell would be an example of the pragmatic approach, which is essentially doing what needs to be done to get to coming to know something. So it's a little bit of it's not monogamous, let's put it that way. It's not attached to a particular way of thinking about methodology. So let's look then at what this means to the overall approach to what we do. So we move from paradigm to methodology. And the methodologies that we just talked about could end up being some of these. So we've got experimental, quasi-experimental, correlational, and so on. We talked about some of these in some of the previous readings under positivism and post-positivism. In some other readings, we've talked about naturalistic inquiry, phenomenological inquiry, hermeneutics, interpretivism, and so on, and that fits within the interpretivist and constructivist paradigm. Then we talked about the transformative, and some of you have committed yourselves or feel a commitment to transformative paradigm, which could fall into various categories. So there's critical theory, which is something that probably most of you are familiar with, neo-Marxist theory, feminist theory, which is the kind of work that I often do, critical race theory, which has become very influential, particularly in the United States and to some degree in Canada, in looking at issues around indigeneity and so on. And then participatory, for example, participatory action research, which is looking to change what is. So we work together towards change, and then we document that process. And then the pragmatic looks at the consequences of actions. It tends to be more problem-centered. It's very pluralistic, so it can draw from all kinds of the traditions. And it's really centered and focused on real-world practice, and it's oriented towards real-world practice. And then there are, of course, others as well, so the etc. Suggests that, and they talk about that in the article. So what they say is, based on their reading of various authors, methodology is the frame of reference for the research which is influenced by the paradigm in which our theoretical perspective is placed or developed. So it's a frame of reference. It's it's what houses what is when you're doing your research. So it influences of the various decisions that you make about the methods that you choose and so on. So we could argue, although it's certainly not as neat as this looks, and I think many of the authors have cautioned about that. But in many ways, your area of inquiry is where you start. You may feel yourself committed to a particular paradigm. So you may feel committed to, or the area of inquiry suggests a commitment to a particular paradigm. So it may suggest that if you're looking at, for example, Indigenous education and success rates of Indigenous students, well, we may want to do it in a positivist way, that is, numerically collect numeric evidence of how many students go into secondary schools and post-secondary schools, success rates, etc., etc., and that tells us a particular story. But much of the work in this area, for obvious reasons, because we already know essentially what the statistics are. So although we may want to know for a particular community or a particular area, and that may be helpful in doing various things. But essentially what we're more committed to often in this area of research is transformation. So we may look at the transformative paradigm. And there would be other kinds of questions that would suggest a particular paradigm, although you don't necessarily have to pick that one. But once we've picked our paradigm, and once we've situated ourselves, let's put it that way, that's, I think, a better way to put it. We've situated ourselves in a particular paradigm that suggests methodologies. So if I've picked a transformative paradigm, I'm not likely to choose methodologies that are related to post-positivism, for example. But that doesn't mean that I can't be informed by research in that area, or even do some research in that area to inform a broader analysis. But nevertheless, my methodology is likely to be chosen in relation to the paradigm, and it should be. And then the methods that we choose, that is what we actually do, the data collection that we, tools that we use, those are our methods. And so we're going to then choose particular kinds of data collection tools. So our data collection tools may cross methodological boundaries. So, you know, we may include interviews under transformative. We may include interviews most likely under interpretivism, for example, and so on. So there are various tools that we may use across methodological boundaries. It's the paradigm and research question which should determine which of the methods is most appropriate for the study. So because you're choosing a particular method does not necessarily mean that you're being you're not staying true to a particular paradigm or a particular methodology. The methods tend to be much more broadly cast. And so those data collection tools, they talk about in the article in greater detail. Oh dear, sorry about that. Oh, okay. Oh dear, sorry. Oh, I guess I was at the end. So I apologize. So I hope that this will be a bit of an outline for you when you do your reading of the last article. I would strongly suggest, however, they make brief reference to postmodernism and post-structuralism. And it's so brief that it really does not do service to either of those approaches to our research. And I would suggest you simply not pay attention to them, because what the quotes that they use suggest do not suggest completely enough what is meant by postmodernism and post-structuralism. So so just simply ignore that part. And I say that only because it could end up being more confusing than it's worth. So we're finished our video, and I've technically really messed this one up, but I'm not going to do it again. I hope it's been helpful to you, and I hope that you are going to enjoy doing each of the assignments, and I know that you'll learn a great deal from each one of them. So take care, keep those questions coming in, and I'll be back to you when you send me questions about any that remain for you when you're thinking about your research coming up. Take care.